Have you ever stayed awake long after midnight because your mind refused to let go of something unsettling? Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters chasing people through the woods. Sometimes they're about ordinary places, places you pass every day, where something impossible waits in silence. Tonight's stories are completely fictional, created to pull you into a world where reality slowly falls apart. Dim the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, some doors should never be opened. Some voices should never be answered, and some rides should never be taken. This is 3 fictional horror stories that will destroy your sleep for Daniel. Working overtime had become routine. Every Friday he stayed late to finish reports while everyone else hurried home. His office overlooked the city skyline, and by the time he packed his laptop into his bag, every other floor in the building was dark. Outside, rain soaked the empty streets. The wind carried scraps of newspapers through deserted intersections, and the glow from streetlights reflected across puddles like pools of black glass. Daniel checked his phone. 12:47 a.m. He sighed. He had missed the final scheduled subway train. Calling a taxi wasn't impossible, but surge pricing during storms was ridiculous. The subway station was only a few blocks away. Maybe, just maybe, one last train was running behind schedule. The entrance to Ashbury Station looked abandoned. Water dripped steadily from the concrete ceiling. Half the fluorescent lights buzzed weakly. The station was silent. Too silent. Daniel walked toward the platform and checked the electronic display. No more trains tonight. He frowned. I figured. Still, he decided to wait a few minutes before giving up. The platform stretched endlessly into darkness. No conversations. No announcements. No footsteps. Only the distant sound of dripping water echoing through the tunnels. Then, a low metallic rumble. Daniel looked up. The display still read, "No more trains tonight." But deep inside the tunnel, 2 headlights appeared. An old subway train slowly emerged from the darkness. It wasn't one of the city's modern silver trains. Its paint was faded. Windows were scratched. Rust covered the doors. It looked like it belonged in another decade. The train stopped perfectly in front of him. The doors slid open with a painful metallic screech. No conductor stepped out. No announcement played. The interior lights flickered weakly. Daniel hesitated. Maybe it was some maintenance train transporting workers. Then he noticed passengers. About 10 people sat quietly inside. None of them moved. None spoke. All stared straight ahead. Daniel stepped aboard. The doors immediately slammed shut behind him. The train began moving. At first, everything seemed normal. Rain streaked across the windows. The tracks rattled beneath the carriage. Daniel chose a seat near the middle. He looked around. Every passenger looked wrong. Not frightening, just still. A woman held a newspaper but never turned the page. An old man stared at the floor without blinking. A teenager wore headphones that weren't connected to anything. Nobody acknowledged anyone else. Daniel cleared his throat. Long night? Silence. Not one person reacted. He laughed awkwardly. Guess everyone's tired. Still, nothing. The train arrived at the next station. The doors opened. No one entered. No one exited. The doors closed again. As the train started moving, Daniel noticed something strange. One seat was empty. The old man had disappeared. Daniel looked toward both ends of the carriage. There was nowhere he could have gone. He hadn't passed Daniel. He hadn't exited. He was simply gone. Daniel convinced himself he'd imagined where the man had been sitting. People moved. He must have missed it, right? The second stop came 5 minutes later. Again, the doors opened. No passengers. No station staff. Only darkness beyond the platform. When the train pulled away, another passenger had vanished. The woman with the newspaper. Her paper now rested neatly folded on the seat. But she was gone. A cold sensation crawled across Daniel's neck. He stood. Hello? No answer. He walked into the next carriage. Empty. The next one. Empty. The entire train seemed deserted, except for the carriage he'd left. When he returned, the remaining passengers were still sitting exactly as before, as though they had never moved, as though they had never even noticed he'd left. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Something wasn't right, and it was only getting worse. Daniel pulled out his phone. No signal. Not even a single bar. He tried opening the subway map instead. The blue dot that normally showed his location was gone. Only a blank gray screen stared back at him. The train entered another tunnel. This one was different. The darkness outside the windows wasn't interrupted by maintenance lights or emergency exits. It was endless, almost alive. Then the carriage lights flickered. For the briefest moment, every passenger turned their heads toward him at exactly the same time. Daniel froze. The lights steadied again. Everyone faced forward, as if nothing had happened. His pulse hammered in his ears. No. I imagined that. He wanted to believe it, but deep down, he knew he hadn't. The next station appeared through the darkness. Daniel frowned. He had never seen it before. The platform sign read, Black Ridge Canyoneers. He'd lived in the city for nearly 15 years. There was no Black Ridge station. The doors opened. Outside, the platform was empty. Dust covered every bench. Old advertising posters hung in torn strips from the walls. The clocks had stopped at 3 a.m. Not a single sound echoed through the station. It looked abandoned for decades. The doors closed again. The train continued. Daniel rushed to the window, trying to memorize the station's name. Within seconds, the platform disappeared into darkness. Now only 6 passengers remained. Every few minutes, one simply vanished. No footsteps. No opening doors, no movement. Just gone. The silence inside the carriage became unbearable. Then Daniel noticed something new. The woman sitting closest to him was smiling. Not a friendly smile, a wide, unnatural smile. Slowly, without moving the rest of her body, her eyes rolled toward him. She never blinked. Daniel stood so quickly his backpack hit the seat behind him. The woman remained perfectly still smiling, still watching. The train accelerated. Faster, much faster than any subway should. The tunnel walls blurred into black streaks. The lights dimmed again. This time they stayed dim. The carriage filled with a low humming sound, like dozens of people whispering beneath the floor. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he knew they were speaking to him. The whispers grew louder, closer. His breathing became shallow. Then, the train announcement crackled to life. A voice, distorted by static, echoed through the speakers. Final stop. Long pause. All remaining passengers. Another burst of static. Please stay seated forever. The speakers went silent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He looked around. Only 3 passengers remained. The smiling woman. The teenager with the broken headphones. A man wearing an old conductor's uniform. The conductor slowly stood. His movements were unnaturally stiff, like an old puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Without saying a word, he pointed toward Daniel. Every remaining passenger stood at exactly the same time. Their smiles widened. Daniel backed away until he hit the carriage door. The lights flashed. For one terrifying second, their faces changed. Eyes completely black, skin pale like cracked porcelain, mouths stretched far beyond what should have been possible. Then darkness. Complete darkness. The lights died. The train screeched violently. Daniel stumbled to the floor. The emergency lights switched on, bathing the carriage in deep red. The passengers were gone. Every seat was empty. Only silence remained. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the next carriage. One step, another, closer. Daniel didn't wait. He ran. Through one carriage, then another. Every carriage was abandoned. Old newspapers covered the floors. Cobwebs stretched across broken seats. Rust covered every window. It looked less like a working subway, and more like a train that had been forgotten for 50 years. The footsteps kept following. Never faster, never slower. Always the same distance behind him. At the front of the train, Daniel found the driver's cabin. The door hung slightly open. Inside, no driver. Only a dusty control panel. On the wall hung a faded newspaper clipping. He picked it up with shaking hands. The headline read, "Last passenger train disappears into tunnel, no survivors found." The date was 1978. Daniel's hands began trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't just an old train. It was the train, the one that had vanished nearly 50 years ago. Something moved behind him. Very slowly. He turned. The conductor stood at the cabin door, smiling. Without blinking, he lifted one pale hand and pointed toward the platform outside. The train was slowing. One final station approached. The sign outside simply read, "End of the line." The train came to a slow, grinding stop. Metal screamed against metal as the wheels locked into place. Outside the window, there was no station, no platform, no lights, only an endless gray fog stretching in every direction. The sign that read "End of the Line" stood alone, attached to a rusted post, disappearing into the mist. The doors slid open. A freezing wind rushed into the carriage. Daniel looked behind him. The conductor hadn't moved. Neither had the smiling passengers. They simply stood there, waiting, almost expecting him to step outside. Something deep inside told him one thing: don't leave the train. But another thought hit him just as hard. If the doors closed again, he might never get another chance. Daniel tightened the straps of his backpack. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then he ran, a laugh, underscore. The moment his shoes touched the ground, the train let out a deafening horn. The doors slammed shut. Daniel spun around. The rust-covered train began rolling backwards into the fog. Slowly, silently. The passengers never looked away. Every face remained pressed against the windows, watching him. The conductor raised one hand, not waving goodbye, pointing directly behind Daniel, underscore. He turned. Someone was standing in the fog, a tall silhouette, far too tall to be human. Its arms nearly touched the ground. Its face couldn't be seen, only two pale white eyes floated in the darkness. It took one slow step toward him. Daniel backed away. Another step. The fog seemed to move with it, almost as if the darkness itself were alive. Then, the train disappeared completely. Its lights faded. Its sound vanished. Daniel was alone. Underscore. He ran without knowing where he was going. There were no tracks anymore. No station. Only cracked concrete, stretching endlessly through the mist. His lungs burned. His legs felt like they would collapse. Then, a faint light appeared ahead. Small, warm, real. He sprinted toward it. The fog began thinning. The ground changed beneath his feet. Concrete became wet pavement. Streetlights flickered above him. Car horns echoed in the distance. Daniel stumbled onto a familiar city street. People walked past as if nothing had happened. A taxi nearly hit him as he stepped into the road. The driver leaned out the window. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Daniel looked back. The subway entrance stood behind him, perfectly normal. Morning commuters hurried down the stairs carrying coffee. The storm was gone. Sunlight filled the streets. Had it all been a nightmare? Underscore. He rushed home without saying a word to anyone. After sleeping nearly 12 hours, he convinced himself exhaustion had caused hallucinations. Days passed, then weeks. Life slowly returned to normal. Until one evening, curiosity got the better of him. He visited the city library. An elderly archivist helped him search old newspaper records. Daniel asked about strange subway accidents. The archivist paused, then quietly disappeared into the archive room. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a faded newspaper. Daniel's stomach dropped. It was the same headline he'd seen inside the driver's cabin. Last passenger train disappears into tunnel. No survivors found. The article explained that in 1978, the city's final late-night train entered a tunnel during a severe electrical storm. It never reached the next station. Rescue crews searched for weeks. The train was never found. Every passenger was declared dead. The archivist looked at Daniel. "You seem disturbed." Daniel hesitated. "Did anyone ever report seeing it again?" The old man became unusually quiet. Then he whispered, "Only one person." Daniel felt a chill spread through his body. What happened to him? The archivist slowly closed the newspaper. He disappeared the following week. Underscore. Daniel never used the subway again. He changed jobs, moved to another part of the city, bought a car. For years, nothing happened. Until one rainy Friday night. Traffic forced him to stop beside an old railway crossing. As he waited, a rust-covered subway train slowly crossed in front of him. It made no sound. Its windows were filled with silent passengers. Every one of them stared straight ahead. Then, one face turned toward him. It was the elderly archivist, pale, expressionless, sitting perfectly still. Beside him, an empty seat. As if someone was expected, the train disappeared into the darkness. There were no tracks beyond the crossing, only empty road. Daniel sat frozen behind the steering wheel. His phone suddenly vibrated, an unknown number. He answered with shaking hands. At first, only static. Then a calm voice whispered, "Your train arrives next Friday." The call ended. Daniel looked at the dashboard clock. It read 12:47 a.m., the exact same time his nightmare had begun. And every Friday since then, at exactly 12:47 a.m., his phone rings. He has never answered again. But deep down, he knows one thing. Sooner or later, the last passenger train always comes back. Michael had lived in busy cities his entire adult life. Traffic never bothered him. Neither did loud neighbors. After years of working double shifts, he had learned one simple truth. If a place was quiet, it was worth every penny. So when he found an old apartment at half the normal rent, he signed the lease the same day. The building wasn't attractive. The paint peeled from the walls. The hallway lights flickered constantly. The lift hadn't worked in years. But apartment 4B was clean, spacious, and strangely peaceful. The landlord handed Michael a single brass key. "You'll like it here." Michael smiled. "It seems quiet." The landlord hesitated before answering. "It usually is." The first night was perfect. No traffic. No loud music. No shouting neighbors. Michael slept better than he had in months. Until exactly 3:14 a.m. Thump. He opened his eyes. Another sound. Thump, thump, thump. Slow footsteps. Directly above his bedroom. Someone was walking across the ceiling. Michael looked at his phone. Probably another tenant. He rolled over and tried to ignore it. The footsteps continued. For nearly an hour. Then, they stopped. The next morning, Michael met an elderly woman watering plants in the hallway. She smiled politely. "Sleep well?" "Mostly." He laughed. "My upstairs neighbor walks around a lot." Her smile disappeared. "What upstairs neighbor?" "The one in the apartment above mine." The woman stared at him. "There isn't one." Michael frowned. "What do you mean? The 5th floor has been closed for years." She walked away before he could ask another question. That afternoon, Michael visited the landlord. The woman downstairs said nobody lives above me. The landlord looked uncomfortable. "She's old. She gets confused. So there is someone upstairs." The landlord avoided eye contact. "Don't worry about it." Michael left with more questions than answers. That night, the footsteps returned. Exactly 3:14 a.m. This time, they sounded heavier, not walking, dragging, slowly crossing from one end of the apartment to the other, then back again. Michael grabbed a broomstick and tapped the ceiling. The footsteps stopped instantly. Silence. He smiled. Finally. Then, 3 loud knocks came from directly above. Bang. Bang. Michael's smile vanished. He slowly lowered the broom. No one should have been up there. The following evening, curiosity got the better of him. He climbed the stairs toward the 5th floor. The air grew noticeably colder. Dust covered every step. A thick chain blocked the entrance. A faded sign hung from it. Floor closed. Beyond the chain, a dark hallway stretched into complete darkness. Every apartment door stood open. Michael shone his phone's flashlight inside. Nothing. No furniture. No lights. No voices. Just empty apartments covered in years of dust. He turned to leave, then heard it. A single footstep. Somewhere down the hallway. He aimed the light toward the sound. Nothing. Another step. Closer this time. He backed away. The chain rattled by itself. Michael hurried downstairs without looking back. That night, the footsteps started earlier. 2:57 a.m. This time, someone was running. Heavy footsteps thundered across the ceiling. Back and forth. Back and forth. Faster. Faster. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Michael held his breath. A whisper drifted through the ceiling. Soft. Barely audible. "Michael." He sat upright. His blood turned to ice. He lived alone. "No one should know he was awake," the whisper came again. "Michael." This time, it sounded closer. Almost inside the room. Michael reached for the bedside lamp. Before he could switch it on, 3 slow knocks echoed from his bedroom ceiling. Knock, 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 and then something began scratching directly above his bed. The scratching continued. Slow, deliberate, like long fingernails dragging across old wooden floorboards. Screech, screech. Michael couldn't move. Every instinct told him to stay perfectly still. Then, the scratching stopped. Silence filled the apartment. He exhaled. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the old building was settling. His mind searched desperately for a logical explanation. Then came a sound far worse. A single loud creak, directly above his bed. as though someone had just stepped onto the exact spot where he was lying. The next morning, Michael bought a small security camera. He placed it on a bookshelf facing his bedroom and set it to record through the night. "If I'm imagining this," he muttered, "I'll prove it." That evening, he tried to stay awake. By midnight, his eyelids grew heavy. Eventually, exhaustion won. At 3:14 a.m., Michael woke to complete silence. No footsteps, no scratching, nothing. He almost laughed. Maybe the camera had scared away his imagination. He went back to sleep. The following morning, he opened the footage. The first few hours showed nothing unusual. The timestamp rolled past 3:13 a.m. Then, static briefly covered the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds. The picture returned. Michael was asleep in bed. But something was different. A dark figure stood in the corner of the room, completely motionless. Too tall. Its head almost touched the ceiling. Michael stared at the screen in disbelief. The timestamp continued. 3:14:18. The figure slowly raised one arm, pointing toward the ceiling. Then the recording froze. When the picture returned 5 seconds later, the corner was empty. The figure had vanished. Michael slammed the laptop shut. His hands were shaking. That evening, he confronted the landlord again. "I caught something on camera." The landlord's face lost all color. "You need to stop asking questions." "What happened on the 5th floor?" The landlord remained silent. Michael refused to leave. Finally, the old man sighed. "Years ago, a family lived in apartment 5B. They complained every night about footsteps above them." Michael frowned. "But there's no 6th floor." The landlord nodded slowly. "Exactly." Michael felt his stomach tighten. "What happened to them?" "They moved out." The landlord paused. "At least, that's what everyone believed." Unable to ignore the mystery any longer, Michael returned to the 5th floor after sunset. This time, the chain blocking the hallway had been removed. The corridor was darker than before. His flashlight barely reached the far end. Apartment 5B stood open. The door creaked as he pushed it wider. Dust covered everything. Old furniture remained exactly where it had been abandoned. Family photographs lay scattered across the floor. One picture caught his attention: a smiling family of 3. On the back, someone had written, "Home at last, 1989. Michael looked around. Every clock inside the apartment had stopped. Everyone showed 3:14. A sudden bang echoed somewhere deeper inside the apartment. Michael spun around. Nothing. Another bang. A bedroom door slowly swung open by itself. His flashlight beam trembled. Inside the room, a child's rocking horse gently moved back and forth. No breeze. No open windows. Just rocking. Back and forth. Back and forth. Then it stopped. The room fell silent. Michael backed toward the hallway. His foot struck something. He looked down. Fresh, muddy footprints. They hadn't been there a moment earlier. They led out of the bedroom and continued straight toward him. One footprint, then another, as though someone invisible was walking closer with every second. Michael's breathing became ragged. The footprints stopped less than a meter away. He raised his flashlight. Nothing stood there, but he could feel it. Something was sharing the room with him. Then, a whisper brushed against his ear. "You're downstairs now." Michael turned so quickly he almost dropped the flashlight. The apartment was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. He ran for the hallway. Behind him, heavy footsteps erupted through the abandoned apartment. Not walking anymore. Running. Straight toward him. Michael sprinted down the dark hallway. The footsteps behind him grew louder with every second. Thud. 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 Whatever was chasing him never slowed down. He reached the stairwell and slammed the heavy metal door shut. The footsteps stopped instantly. Silence. Michael leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Then, 3 slow knocks echoed from the other side of the door. Knock, knock, knock. He didn't wait. He ran down 4 flights of stairs until he reached his apartment. He locked the door. Then, every lock he could find. For the rest of the night, nothing happened. No footsteps, no whispers, no scratching. The silence should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like something was waiting, watching, patiently. The next morning, Michael decided to leave. He packed clothes into 2 suitcases and called a moving company. While carrying the final box into the hallway, he noticed the elderly woman from downstairs. She looked at him sadly. I knew you wouldn't stay long. Michael stopped. You knew? She nodded. Everyone leaves. He hesitated. Did you ever hear the footsteps? The woman looked toward the ceiling. I heard them. She lowered her voice. But they weren't above us. Michael frowned. What do you mean? They came from inside the walls. Before he could ask another question, she quietly closed her apartment door. Underscore. The movers loaded the last of Michael's belongings into the truck. As he was about to leave, the driver walked over. Sir, you forgot one of your boxes. Michael looked confused. I packed everything. The driver pointed toward the building entrance. A single cardboard box sat on the pavement. Michael walked closer. Written across the top in black marker were two words, Welcome back, Sleet. He slowly opened the box. Inside, nothing, completely empty. A cold breeze passed through the street. When he looked up, every window on the 5th floor was open. Dark figures stood motionless behind the glass, watching him. He blinked. The windows were empty again. Underscore Michael moved across the city. A newer apartment, a brighter neighborhood. No old buildings, no strange landlords. He convinced himself the nightmare was over. Weeks passed peacefully. Then one night, at exactly 3:14 a.m., he woke to absolute silence. He smiled. No footsteps. Maybe it was finally over. Then he noticed something strange. A tiny piece of plaster drifted down from the ceiling. Then another. Tiny cracks slowly spread across the paint, directly above his bed. A fine layer of dust fell onto his blanket. Michael stared upward. Very slowly. A dark wet stain began forming on the ceiling. It grew larger and larger, until it resembled the outline of a human face, 2 hollow eyes, a long mouth, smiling. Then, a single drop of black water landed on his forehead. He jumped out of bed. The stain vanished instantly. The ceiling looked perfectly normal. The following morning, Michael spoke to his new neighbor upstairs. A cheerful young man answered the door. Michael forced a smile. I hope you don't mind me asking. Did you hear anything unusual last night? The neighbor looked puzzled. No, I wasn't even home. I've been visiting my parents all week. Michael's smile faded. If you weren't here, he never finished the sentence. That evening, he searched online for the history of his old apartment building. After hours of digging through archived newspaper articles, he found a short report from decades earlier. According to the article, the building had originally been designed with 6 floors. During construction, the top floor became structurally unsafe after a partial collapse. The entire 6th floor was sealed inside the building before it ever opened. No official records explained why. No photographs of the sealed floor existed. Only one sentence appeared at the bottom of the article. Construction workers repeatedly reported unexplained footsteps from the unfinished level before the project was abandoned. Michael stared at the screen. There had never been anyone living above apartment 5B, because the footsteps had always come from somewhere even higher. Michael never slept well again. Every time he moved, the footsteps followed. Different apartment, different city, same time. 3:14 a.m. Sometimes slow, sometimes running, sometimes stopping directly above wherever he lay. Years later, he stopped trying to escape, because he finally understood the truth. Whatever lived above him didn't belong to any building. It simply chose a ceiling, and every night, it waited for someone below. Ethan never believed in haunted objects, old dolls, cursed mirrors, strange antiques. To him, they were just stories people told to entertain themselves. So when he found an old portable radio at a weekend flea market, he bought it without a second thought. The seller, an elderly man with tired eyes, held the radio for a moment before handing it over. You can have it for £5. Ethan smiled. Does it still work? The old man hesitated. It always works. There was something odd about the way he said it. Before Ethan could ask another question, the man packed up the rest of his stall and left. The radio looked like it belonged in the 1960s. Its leather handle was cracked. The tuning dial barely moved. Dust covered the speaker. Still, Ethan thought it would make a nice decoration for his apartment. He placed it on a shelf in the living room and forgot about it. That night, around 3 a.m., he woke to a burst of static. Sleep glowed behind the dial. He frowned. I never turned this thing on. He switched it off and returned to bed. The next night, at exactly 3 a.m., the static returned. This time, it lasted only a few seconds before a calm voice emerged from the speaker. A man's voice, clear, emotionless. "Good evening, Ethan." He froze. The voice knew his name. "You are standing in your living room." Ethan stared at the radio. "What?" "You are about to spill your glass of water." He laughed nervously. Very funny. Then, his elbow accidentally hit the glass on the coffee table. Water splashed across the floor. His smile disappeared. The radio fell silent. Underscore. The following morning, Ethan convinced himself it was an incredible coincidence. Maybe someone had hidden a modern speaker inside the old radio. Maybe it was an elaborate prank. That evening, he removed the batteries. He unplugged the power cable. Then he locked the radio inside a kitchen cupboard. At exactly 3 a.m., the cupboard door slowly creaked open by itself. Static filled the apartment once again. The radio was still broadcasting, without batteries, without power, without explanation. Underscore. The voice returned. Tonight's forecast. A pause. Heavy rain will begin in exactly 23 seconds. Ethan looked through the window. The sky was perfectly clear. He counted anyway. 20, 21, 22, 23. Rain crashed against the glass so suddenly that he stumbled backwards. Every weather app on his phone still predicted clear skies. The radio had known first. Night after night, the broadcasts continued. Sometimes the predictions were harmless. Your neighbor will drop his shopping bags. He did. A power cut will last 6 minutes. It did. A black cat will cross the road in front of you. It happened exactly as described. No prediction was ever wrong. Soon, Ethan found himself waiting for 3 a.m. every night. He stopped fearing the broadcasts. He started depending on them. Until one evening, the voice changed. This broadcast concerns only one listener. A long silence followed. Then, do not answer your phone at 3:17 a.m. Ethan frowned. His phone almost never rang after midnight. Still, at 3:17 a.m., it vibrated across the table. Unknown number. He remembered the warning. His finger hovered over the screen. The ringing stopped. A voicemail notification appeared. Hands trembling, he pressed play. Only static. Then a whisper. "You should have answered." The message ended. Ethan deleted the voicemail immediately. He told himself it was another coincidence, another strange trick, nothing more. But that night, he couldn't sleep. Every few minutes he checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages, no notifications. At exactly 3 a.m., the radio switched on again. Static crackled through the apartment. Then the familiar voice returned. Calm, cold, emotionless. Tonight's broadcast begins now. Ethan slowly walked toward the shelf. The green light behind the tuning dial pulsed like a heartbeat. The voice continued. At exactly 3:09 a.m., someone will knock on your apartment door. Ethan looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. He laughed nervously. No one even knows I'm awake. The seconds crawled by. 3:08. 3:09. Knock. A single knock echoed through the apartment. Ethan froze. Another knock. Knock. He slowly approached the front door and looked through the peephole. Nobody. The hallway was empty. He unlocked the door just enough to peek outside. Nothing. Only a dimly lit corridor stretching in both directions. As he closed the door, he noticed something lying on the floor. A small cassette tape. No label, no writing, just an old black cassette. Underscore. The radio spoke again. Do not play the tape. Ethan stared at it. Every instinct told him to throw it away. Instead, he picked it up. The cassette felt strangely warm, as though someone had been holding it only moments earlier. Underscore. The next morning, he searched every cupboard until he found an old cassette player that had belonged to his father. He placed the tape inside, pressed play. At first, only static. Then, a voice. His own voice. Clear, terrified. If you're hearing this, don't listen to the radio. Ethan's face turned pale. The recording continued. It knows everything. It doesn't predict the future. It creates it. The tape suddenly stopped. No click. No rewind. Just silence. That night, Ethan waited beside the radio. He wanted answers. Exactly 3 a.m., the broadcast began. The voice sounded almost amused. You listened. Ethan shouted at the radio. What are you? No answer. Instead, the voice calmly continued. At 3:11 a.m., you will look behind you. Ethan clenched his fists. I'm not playing your game. The clock reached 3:11 a.m. He stared straight ahead, determined not to move. The apartment was completely silent. Then, he heard breathing, slow, deep, directly behind him. Every hair on his arms stood up. His heart pounded. The voice whispered through the speaker. Curiosity always wins. Without thinking, Ethan turned around. Nothing. The room was empty. He let out a shaky laugh. Then he looked back toward the radio. Someone was standing beside it. A tall figure dressed in dark clothing. Its face was completely hidden in shadow. Before Ethan could scream, the lights went out. The apartment fell into complete darkness. Only the radio remained illuminated by its faint green glow. The broadcast continued. Final announcement begins in 1 minute. The apartment was silent. Not the comforting kind of silence, the kind that feels heavy, the kind that makes you believe something is standing only a few feet away, watching. Ethan didn't dare move. The faint green glow from the radio was the only light left in the room. Its speaker crackled softly. Then the calm voice returned. Final announcement. A long burst of static filled the room. The listener is no longer alone. Ethan's breathing became shallow. His eyes searched every dark corner. Nothing. Then, a floorboard creaked. Behind him, he spun around. The apartment was empty. When he looked back, the radio had disappeared. Only a rectangular patch of dust remained on the shelf where it had been sitting. Underscore. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. Against every instinct, he answered. For several seconds, only static. Then, he heard himself breathing. Exactly as he was breathing now. Slow. Uneven. Terrified. A second voice whispered over the line. It was his own voice. Don't turn around. The call disconnected. Ethan's blood ran cold. If the recording had warned him not to turn around, then something had to be behind him. He squeezed his eyes shut. No, I'm not looking. The apartment remained silent. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally, he convinced himself it was over. Very slowly, he opened his eyes. The room was still empty. He laughed weakly. I beat it. Then he noticed something in the television screen. His reflection was smiling. Ethan wasn't. He stumbled backwards. The reflection remained perfectly still. Its smile widened. Then, it slowly lifted one hand, not to wave, to point. Pointing behind Ethan. He refused to look. The reflection's smile stretched impossibly wide. Its lips moved, although no sound came from the television. Ethan knew exactly what it was saying. Too late. Every light in the apartment exploded at once. Glass showered across the floor. Darkness swallowed the room again. Underscore. The next morning, neighbors complained that Ethan's alarm had been ringing for hours. The building manager unlocked the apartment. Everything inside looked normal. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No blood. No Ethan. The apartment was empty, except for one object. The old radio sat neatly on the living room shelf, covered in dust, as if it had never been touched. Police searched for weeks. They found no trace of Ethan. Eventually, the case was closed as a missing person investigation. The radio was boxed up with the rest of his belongings and sent to a storage auction. Months later, it was purchased for a few pounds by another collector. No one knew where it came from. No one asked. One rainy evening, a university student named Oliver carried the old radio into his flat. It'll look nice on the bookshelf, he laughed. He placed it beside the television, forgot about it, and went to bed. At exactly 3 a.m., static filled the apartment. Oliver opened his bedroom door. The green light behind the tuning dial slowly came to life. A calm voice echoed from the speaker. Good evening, Oliver. The voice paused, then said something it had never said before. Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by our previous listener. A second voice joined the broadcast. Weak, frightened, desperate. Oliver's face drained of color, because he recognized the voice immediately. It wasn't the announcer. It was Ethan. Barely audible through the static, he whispered, Please, don't listen. The transmission ended. The radio clicked off. The apartment fell silent once again. Those were 3 completely fictional horror stories, created for entertainment. Which story disturbed you the most? And if you enjoy original fictional horror stories that keep getting darker with every minute, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.